to take you into Nehemiah, starting out in the 2nd chapter with the 7th verse. And it says, "Moreover, I said unto the king, if it please the king, let letters be given to the governors beyond the river, that they may convey me over till I come into Judah. And a letter unto Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the palace, which pertain to the house, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall enter into. And the king granted me according to the good hand of my God upon me." Nehemiah, to the grief of his enemies, comes to Jerusalem. He says in the 9th verse, "Then I came to the governors beyond the river, and I gave them the king's letters, and now the king had sent captains of the army of his horsemen with me." And the 10th verse says, "When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, heard of it, it grieved them exceedingly that there was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel." Now, when I went to look up that word Sanballat in the Hebrew, that word in the Hebrew means the enemy in secret. In Romans chapter 8 and verse 7, it tells us that the enemy of God is our mind. And so, one of the biggest obstacles that we have to come over as believers and overcome and be overcomers of is our own mind. It says, "When Sanballat and the rest heard the plans, they scorned them and they despised them." There are always going to be people out there, the enemy, that do not want to see you be successful as a Christian. He does not want you to be successful. Because when you are successful, people see that you are successful and they want what you have. The 4th chapter in the 7th verse says, "But it came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up and that the breaches began to be stopped, then they were very wroth. And they conspired all of them together to come to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it." I'm going to tell you something tonight, brothers and sisters. The enemy has heard a rumor that things are happening. And he has conspired against the very works of God. Oh, come on, you can say amen. The enemy is on an assignment to derail the plan and the purpose of God for this church and for your life. What's the plan and the purpose of this church? The plan and the purpose of this church is to evangelize this community. He's on a mission to stop the plan and the call and the purpose of this church. What is the plan and the purpose of your life? The plan and the purpose of your life is to be a lighthouse where you shine in your own family, in your own neighborhood, to your own neighbors. And if the enemy can derail you, if the enemy can put your light out, if the enemy can shut you down, then you are unable to fulfill the very purpose that God has called you to fulfill. Now, what did he call Nehemiah to do? He called Nehemiah to go in and to rebuild Jerusalem. He called Nehemiah to go in and to rebuild the walls that had been torn down and to repair the breaches. What's a breach? A hole. A gap. Hallelujah. It's time for the people of God to repair the breaches and to stand in the gap and to fill the gap where there is a gap so there isn't a gap anymore. He has conspired to come against the works of God, and he has an assignment. Ezekiel chapter 34 and verse 12 says that he will seek out his sheep and he will deliver them out of all the places where they've been scattered. I want to tell you something. If you were to think about all of the people that have come through the doors of this place, there would not be enough chairs in this building. They've been scattered. But it is time to repair. It is time to rebuild. It is time to bring back. It is time for us to claim the word of the Lord. Ezekiel chapter 34 and verse 12, that he will seek out those sheep and he will deliver them out of the places where they have been scattered to and return them to where they belong. And yes, some of that has happened. A start. But it's not the fulfillment. I believe that there are many others out there that need to come home. They need to return to this Jerusalem place. Verse 14, chapter 4. And I looked and rose up, and I said unto the nobles and to the rulers and to the rest of the people, be not ye afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, your houses. Be ye not afraid of them. Remember, the Lord's fighting your battle. He's fighting for your household. He is fighting for your children. He's fighting for your brother. He's fighting for your sister. He's fighting for your spouse. Not fighting with your spouse. That's a whole other story. So, he's fighting for your very household, folks. God is in control. God is the one who's winning the battle when we allow Him to. He's fighting on our behalf. Chapter 4 and verse 16 says, and it came to pass from that time forth that half of my servants wrought in the work, and the other half of them held both the spears and the shields and the bows and the habergeons. And the rulers were behind all of the house of Judah. Now the Hebrew word habergeon means breastplate. And we go back over and you can look what Paul said in Ephesians chapter 6. And he said, it's time for you to put on the breastplate of righteousness, the helmet of salvation, and lift up your shield of faith and use the sword of the Spirit. God is calling us to use the very weapons that He has put in our hand to fight the enemy. You know, as I preached this morning, David got ready to go out and he began to they said, he said, I'll go out and I'll fight Goliath. I'll take him on. And so they said, okay, David, here you go. Here's Saul's armor. You put on Saul's armor. It's about 120 pounds. David's just a 17-year-old young man, probably not all that large in stature, and he got all that armor on and he couldn't move, he couldn't do anything with it, and he said, I don't know how to fight with any of this right now. This is not what God's called me to use right now. This right here, this slingshot, this is the only thing I know how to use. Okay? So what God is saying to us is the very tools that He has put in our hands is what we have to use, and that is the sword of faith, the sword of the Spirit. Lift up our breastplate of righteousness that will fire off or defend ourselves from those fiery darts. Put on that helmet of salvation. Walk around like somebody who is a child of the Most High God. Walk around like we belong to the King. 17th verse says, they which builded on the wall, and they that bear burdens with those that laid it, every one of them, or every one with one of his hands, wrought in the work, and with the other hand held a weapon. Now, I don't know about you, but it would be tough to work building a wall while you got your hand on a weapon. I'm not that good. You know, it'd be tough to be building blocks with only one hand. You know, it'd be tough to be building blocks while you are looking around to see where the enemy's at. It would be tough to be trying to get the job done if you're worried about, well, is the enemy coming or not? And I got my hand on my sword. I'm ready to go to battle, but I'm also got to build a wall. It says, for the builders, everyone had his sword girded by his side, and so he builded, and he that sounded the trumpet was by me, said Nehemiah. And he said unto the nobles and to the rulers, in the 19th verse, and to the rest of the people, the work is great and large, and we are separated upon the wall, one far from another. In what place therefore ye hear the sound of the trumpet, resort ye thither unto us. Our God shall fight for us. So we labored in the work, and half of them held their spears from the rising of the morning till the stars appeared. Brother Darrell, would you come here for a second? You know, if you're going to be building this wall, as long as we're sitting here like this, we're looking at each other. We're not really covering each other. But if he turns around and I'm looking this way and he's looking that way, I got his back. He's got my back. And the problem is, in the church, folks, is we haven't always had each other's back. And we've been concentrated on our own instead of looking out for our brother and our sister. And so what they were talking about here was they would work in pairs. And so one would be prepared. One was looking one way, the other was looking the other way, and they always had their eye out. And what I believe that God is calling this church, what I believe that God is calling the people of God to, is it is time for us to come together and to cover each other. To cover each other in prayer, to have each other's back like we have never had each other's back before, to keep the distractions away. Can you imagine how distracted they had to have been trying to build a wall while they're looking around, seeing if the enemy's going to come, and they got their hand on the sword? The enemy has come with great distraction that keeps the church from fully working to advance the kingdom. And we must always remain in watch, never to give the enemy a chance to take ground or to attack because we were unprepared. When we went to Vietnam as a country, we were unprepared. We did not know how our enemy was going to fight. My Bible tells me, ladies and gentlemen, that we are not ignorant of the enemy's ways and how he fights. We already know. We know how he fights. We already know. The first thing that he tries to do is to sneak in that unbelief. The next thing that he tries to do is to sneak in that depression, which turns to oppression, which turns to, I just want to lay down and die. I wish it would all go away. Am I telling you something different? Does he work different in your life than? Because that's how he works in my life. Does he work different in your life? We're not ignorant. This is the way he operates, folks. And when we are watching each other's backs, when we are covering our brother and our sister in prayer, we won't be ignorant of the fact that they're going through these things. We won't be ignorant of the fact that the enemy is on point on them and about to prance on them. We won't be ignorant of it because we will have seen it, we will have experienced it, and we will know that God is needing us to stand in the gap for them and lift them up in prayer and to cover them with prayer for their life. God's calling us to do that as a church. God's calling us to do that as Christians. God's calling us to do that, not just for Community Revival Center Church, but for all of our brothers and sisters. The 6th chapter of Nehemiah says, we know that the enemy tries to attack Nehemiah. Why? Because Nehemiah is a leader. The common practice of the enemy is to, anybody know? He attacks the leadership first. I know I'm probably killing Dan's leadership class right there, but folks, that's what happens. Why? Because the scriptures are clear. You strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. He's not stupid. He knows exactly how to operate. We're the ones who haven't quite figured it out, apparently. But God's calling us to stand in the gap. God's calling us to repair the breaches that have taken place. And so I'm going to ask you, see, I told you I'm going to get you out of here early tonight. I'm going to ask you to come up, and we're going to stand in a group, in a circle,